Hear you, Faisal. Yeah, you're muted. No, no sound. No sound. No sound. I can't hear you, Faisal.
Good evening, good
Hello.
morning, good afternoon to our speakers and to our host and to to those people who are watching our channel. We would like to welcome our professors for the fifth session of today, and who will be like by the chair of this session, our professor Mr. Kamal Zulja. Yes, sir, you are highly welcome, and you have the speech, sir.
Okay, thank you. So let's. I don't remember the order of the talks. So we are starting with Nija, Nitu. I'm
Yes,
sorry,
Nituja. Yes,
Nitu.
yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
and let's continue with Urosh, and I'll speak. I'll be the last one. So because I'm like the host here, we are from Turkey, so. Uh,
Yeah.
so okay, I don't know if the YouTube live broadcast has started. Let me check that.
Yes,
I,
started, Professor.
it has started.
Started.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay then. Let's start with Nitu Ja. The floor is yours, Nitu.
Yes.
We
Hello,
have.
everyone.
I'm sorry. Let's do it like 15 minutes presentation for each, and let's reserve 15 another minutes for Q&A. Is that okay?
Yes. From me, it's okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. You may start. You too.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm going to discuss about the Gandhian economic thoughts. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, our very known Indian freedom fighter. Maybe you have all listened about the Gandhi, or I don't know. I think. So I'm going to discuss his economic thought about. He was basically thinking about the poor people and the urban or rural states of our economy. So it's a social and economic perspective of Gandhian economic thought I'm going to discuss. So Gandhi occupies a unique place in the history of our Indian freedom struggle and bring about a large awakening in the country. Throughout his life, Gandhi tried to find out different ways to fight against India's extreme poverty, backwardness, and social economic challenges as a part of his involvement in Indian independence movement. He believed that Western pattern of economic growth will not solve the kind of problem India was facing at the time. The Gandhian thoughts are more relevant even today because both nationalization and privatization has failed to solve the problems like poverty, unemployment, inequality, environment degradation of etc. There is hardly any need to narrate Gandhi's life history for the purpose of abstracting his economic ideas. Throughout his life, Gandhi developed different ways to fight the poverty and backwardness of Indian society. Gandhi believed that capitalistic method of production not only aggregates the problem of unemployment, poverty, but also neglects human values. The problems has been tackled through the development of village cottage industries. Moreover, religious leader as Gandhi was, he preferred to bring economic changes in a truthful and non-violent manner. He wanted to rebuild Indian economy on purely Indian pattern. His philosophy was based on truth, ahimsa non-violence, and service to society, particularly the poor downturn. The basis of economic philosophy was individual dignity. Therefore, he insists for the poor welfare society or the society which give value to the labor forces also. Therefore, the economic system should be organized to provide employment for everyone. Gandhi's views on economic was simple and straightforward, which would make Indian economy self-sufficient manufacturing and satisfy its own needs in domestic market, homegrown ways. His economic thought is based on four fundamental principles: truth, non-violence, dignity of labor, and simplicity. Another important principle that played a significant role in Gandhi's life was simple living and high thinking. The economics of Gandhi might also be described as the economics of non-violence. Gandhi considered human being as wealth, not gold or silver. He considered a country to be rich if it nourished the greatest number of happy individuals. Thus, the Gandhian economic thought man occupied a prominent position than wealth. During his stay in South Africa, Gandhi was against industrialism. He considered it as a machine civilization. He felt that machine would lead to the slavery of the laborers. The laborers will be deprived of the sources of livelihood. He described industrialism, a manifestation of capitalism, as the control of majority of a small majority by a small minority. And in his thoughts, his economic ideas are even we can relate these his economic thoughts in modern India today. The relevance of Gandhi's economic thoughts are still can be solved with the many economics tends to dismiss Gandhian economic thought. They regard Gandhi as a medieval mystique who tried to put back the clock of human progress, but much of the criticism is based on a gross misunderstanding of Gandhi's view. He was against the he was not against the industrialization. He was against the uh, unequal distribution of the money. He wanted that globalization he also encouraged the globalization, but due to his ongoing process, India has been giving a stress on expansion of industrialization on large scale. But Gandhi wants to want the industrialization and technology to continue on the small scale industries. As a result, new and foreign industries are coming to Indian industry, but they enhance or they grows the large scale or rural urban areas, but rural areas of the country are still suffering due to the globalization. The small scale and cottage industry facilitated to achieve equitable and sustainable growth. Gandhi said India lives in her villages. Even in the wake of growing urbanization, villages still remain in the heart of Indian economy. Gandhi wanted to use Indian industries as the weapon for the uh, Swadeshi movement. It is often thought that Gandhi was essentially a religious ascetic who has advanced the fruit of modern science and technology. It is unfortunate misconception. The small scale and cottage industry occupies important place in our planet, contributing towards the fulfillment of social economic objectives of Gandhi's in achieving equitable and sustainable growth. Small scale industries in India will depend not on the mass production but on the production by masses. It is a country like India, where capital is scarce and labor is abundant, it would be profitable to use labor-intensive industries. Gandhiji wanted to promote labor-intensive techniques of production about generating employment for rural people. This economic philosophy of Gandhiji has lot of relevance to present day's economic problems of India. According to him, economy cannot be complete without the essential village industries. Khadi is one of Gandhi's great approach to self-reliance. According to him, raw materials of Khadi industries could be easily available in villages from agriculture sector, and automatically market for agriculture products will be available at the same place. Recently, different initiatives have been taken both at the center and state to further establish the khadi and cottage industries that provides employment opportunities to to lakh of thousands of people of India. Over the years, our khadi and village industries have grown strengthened to strengthen. If all people do the labor for their bread, according to Gandhi, there will be enough food and clothing for all. This will keep them healthy and happy, and there will be no problem of food shortage and any disease and misery. But this concept of bread labor advocate the people to be self-sufficient, and it strengthens the nation of sustainable development. If all people do labor for their bread, inequality will be reduced. Therefore, the need of the hour is to follow the Gandhi's concept of bread to labor to achieve self-sufficient and self-justice. Gandhi emphasis on non-violence, decentralization, village Swaraj, all are relevant today. Gandhi firmly believed that communist methods of violence and class war was unsuitable. His concept of Gram Swaraj clearly implied that each village should be self-reliant by making provisional of all necessary of life, such as food, clothing, clean water, housing, sanitation, etc. Gandhi thought that Wealth is only a means, not the ends. But in present world, money has wealth has taken all the places as the means are as well as ends. For that, a section of people is breaking laws, rules, and regulation, humanity, morality, non-violence. Wealth is everything for everybody. Today, there is gross economic inequality. It is base of capitalism. Well, Gandhiji was not opposed of private ownership of industries and businesses. He advocated social control of businesses so that the profit generated are equitably distributed to prevent centralization of wealth in the hands of a few people, which leads to exploitation. Gandhian economy is still relevant in our times. Gandhi's term True Swadeshi consists in enhancing the stimulative cottage and small industry. It also provides opportunities to the original talent and imagination of the people. Nowadays, India is facing so many problems such as poverty, unemployment, increasing corruption, pollution, terrorism, so on, and the current health crisis also. If we had implemented Gandhi's economic ideology and the Swadeshi manner to be self-reliant, so we there would be no there would have been a long-term different scenario because he supported rural-centric development with agriculture and small-scale industries getting pride of places as this is the only way the unemployment problem can be solved in labor abundant country like India. If I'm concluding with the concluding remarks, I want to say that Gandhi's believed in the decentralized development model as this helps the fruit of development reach everyone and promotes equality and social harmony. The center of his economic thought is man, not the material prosperity or scarcity. In such scenario, there is urgent need to rethink about Gandhi's economic ideology. India should emphasize on the policy of Gandhiji, which especially represents the Swadeshi policy and work for human beings. So this was my final conclusion of the thought, Gandhi's economic thought. So thank you from my side. It's okay.
Thank you, Neetu,
Yes.
for this very fruitful presentation. And you actually concluded 5 minutes earlier.
Earlier,
Yes.
was it?
And now the floor is yours, Urosh. Would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much for your warm introduction. I would also like to thank the organizing committee who accepted my paper proposal to be presented here at this International Symposium of Economic Thought. Today, I would like to talk about some topics that seemingly don't have a direct connection with economics. I mean, just look at the title of my paper. It has the undecidability, computable general equilibrium, and a philosophical aspect. Someone would hardly call this an economic paper. Perhaps it would be more suitable for a symposium in applied economics or a purely mathematical one, but not so much in economic thought. But if you can just bear with me, you will see that all this sheds light to a very particular and peculiar problem, one to be found in the midst of the contemporary economic model building and policy making. Now, my talk will be divided into 3 short sections. But before going into them, let me first introduce my operating thesis for this paper. In taking up the French philosopher Alain Badiou's project of mathematics is ontology, it attempts to critically assess the axiomatic approaches of Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu's equilibrium analysis, as in, for instance, Debreu's theory of value. Now, it does so by taking into account the recent criticisms posed by Kumaraswamy Vela-Velupillai's work in computable economics. Now, in the first part, we will briefly overview the current state of affairs between science and philosophy through the lenses of some particular orientations in thought and also mathematics. Now, the second part will briefly expound upon the untenable computation of general equilibria from a constructivist mathematical point of view, leading to an impasse for mathematical economics. And in the third part, we shall draw some consequences of this situation by returning to our initial position while taking a different route to uncover an old concept once again, that of ideology. Now let us start off with a couple of diametrically opposed statements which will aid us in gaining some background about where things currently stand. Starting with the late Stephen Hawking, who, together with Leonard Mlodinow, in the book titled The Grand Design, states that, I quote, "The traditional questions that philosophy should answer, but unfortunately can't, because philosophy is dead. Philosophy has not kept up with the modern developments in science, particularly physics." Quote. According to their suggestion, the empirical sciences alone now hold the torch of discoveries for humanity, be it those that have to do with either physics or the law. Now, a completely different view is presented by a French philosopher, namely Quentin Meillassoux, in his work After Finitude. I quote, "And since Kant, philosophers in general have been willing to admit that science, and science alone, provides us with theoretical knowledge of nature, and that speculative metaphysics can no longer present itself as harboring knowledge of a supposedly higher reality, whether cosmos, soul, or God, than the reality accessible to us by means of empirical science. But science's promotion over philosophy as guarantor of knowledge has become the locus of a misunderstanding, not to say wrong-footing, that appears to be without precedent in the annals of thought. For it is at the very moment when philosophy attempted for the first time to think rigorously the primacy of scientific knowledge that it decided to observe precisely that aspect of thought which constituted the revolutionary character of scientific knowledge, its speculative import. Thus, philosophy's message to science was, it is you, and not the speculative metaphysics, that holds the reins of knowledge. But the underlying nature of this knowledge is the very opposite of what it seems to you. In other words, in providing the impetus for philosophy's destruction of speculative metaphysics, science also destroyed any possibility of a philosophical understanding of its own essence." End of quote. Now, what this sentence, "any possibility of a philosophical understanding of its own essence," means is precisely that the sciences in this respect cannot think their own position. They have made philosophy renounce its speculative impact, but the alternative has not yet been introduced. It is on this point that Alain Badiou introduces his fundamental philosophical axiom, mathematics is a thought. This, of course, goes first of all against Ludwig Wittgenstein and the empiricist camp, for they strictly uphold that mathematical propositions express no thought. To Badiou, the axiom that mathematics is a thought presents an ever-developing and regulated movement of thought, be it dialectical or some other mode of thinking, and it conjoins with what Plato called for with his notion of idea. Now, there is also one more connection, this time with the great name in mathematics, that of Georg Cantor, and his proposition apropos the inauguration of the set theory, where he posits that the manifold or a set of some many can be thought of as one, that a totality of definite elements can be subsumed under the law of some whole, which is of course a Platonist undertaking, meaning that the abstract mathematical objects exist independently of us and or our language. Such movement of thought or of ideas is perceived through discoveries and innovations that are at the first glance indiscernible and need to be brought into the light. For Badiou's second and equally important fundamental ontological axiom is the following: thought equals being equals consistency. With this, he full-fledgedly endorses a Platonist orientation in mathematics, and in thought for that matter. We will be introducing the two others in just a minute, whereas he follows the steps of Kurt Gödel and the latter's Platonist stance in mathematical logic. Now, following the steps of Gödel and his famous incompleteness theorems, enter the problem of undecidability in a formal system. Simply put, in every formal language system, we are presented with an undecidable statement, one that has to be decided at some point if we want to maintain that mathematics is capable of thinking itself and its object of analysis. Now, as already mentioned, apart from the Platonist orientation of Gödel, we must introduce the other orientations in thought and mathematics, since they're very important for our further discussion. Now, the first may be called constructivist, as in constructivist mathematics, which is also the prevalent orientation of thought in the 20th century relating to the so-called linguistic term. Now, this orientation ends up subordinating existential judgment to finite and controllable linguistic protocols. What can be uttered or formalized is regulated by the transparent and discernible protocols of meaningful language, comprehensible exclusively in themselves and capable of distinguishing between the sayable and the non-sayable, between meaning and nonsense. Thus, reflection on the presumably determinate structure of language yields a kind of critical enterprise that involves the drawing of a regulative line between sense and nonsense, or between the sayable and what cannot be said. To this, we can count the verificationism of Rudolf Carnap or A.J. Ayer, in other words, the whole logical positivist's account. And just to mention in passing the third orientation, it will not interest us at the present discussion, but is relevant for a broader perspective. It may be called transcendental, which succumbs to some superexistence, a body or a totality that assigns the places to every being it regulates, and is simultaneously perceived as a covert absolute. This transcendental and infinite entity, one wholly beyond the finitude of human life and existence, can be associated with the names of Heidegger or Nietzsche. Now, we are not going to dig deep into the debates of philosophy, of mathematics, or logic here. Let us take for granted, and what is also true, that every formal system, every model, every language, as pointed out by Gödel, and spiced up with his generic extension by Paul Cohen, has a statement, a point, that cannot be decided within that order. Moving on to the second part, we now have to illuminate why the problem of the undecidable is a problem in economic theorizing at all. I was profoundly struck when I read the work of Vela Velupillai, a Malaysian, truly sincere mathematical economist, whose work on computable economics has been some 10 years ago presented in his collection of essays titled Computable Foundations for Economics. It has to be mentioned that his standpoint is strictly that of constructivist mathematics. Just a quick and simplified possible definition. Constructivist mathematics' constant adherence to the assumption of an existential quantifier for mathematical objects yields what bears the name constructible universe, the famous V equals L, a hierarchically organized totality or a universe of sets in which existence is controlled strictly by the assumption of some predicative nameability. So returning to Velupillai, this would then imply deploying recursion or rather computability theory. And we shall soon see why this is important. Let me first just state Velupillai's thesis the way I see it. Because of its reliance on Zermelo-Frankel's set theory, along with the axiom of choice, mathematical economics entangles itself in uncomputabilities, non-constructivities, unsolvabilities, and even undecidabilities. Take, for example, the Walrasian economic equilibrium existence, which is proved by Arrow and Debreu. Its existence relies on a specific operation of transposing an economic equilibrium existence problem into a topological fixed point problem. The famous Brewer theorem, or Kakutani's theorem, is reinterpreted by Uzawa's equivalence theorem to conform the involved objects as mathematically identical to the existence of economic equilibrium, be it that of Walrasian, of Arrow-Debreu type, or any other CGE model. The main idea behind this equivalence theorem was to establish an algorithm in order to locate the fixed point or points that would provide options for pinpointing the location of a general equilibrium. Now, what Velupillai is trying to show is that the grounding theorems in mathematics, as for instance, Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem or the Hahn-Banach theorem, rely on either law of excluded middle or law of the double negation or axiom of choice, which doesn't fit very comfortably within constructivist mathematics. Even more, when utilized in economics, they deliver results that are hardly constructive, computable, and thus unattainable. Now, I will not expound on this any further, as we do not have time to go into details, but I do encourage everyone interested to have a look at the formal debunking of these issues in Velupillai's book. Now, what we wish to draw from this discussion is the following. If, indeed, the path along the constructivist mathematics orientation of thought leads us towards the impasses of non-constructability, uncomputability, or undecidability of economic equilibria, where should we turn to then? What if the initial formalist perspective, as pursued in the aforementioned Debreu's theory of value, and today also valid for mathematical economics in general, course, for a totally different approach. One might come up with potentially significant outcomes. Now, as we mentioned, mathematical economics and its foundational base rest on the axioms of ZFC set theory, meaning we are stuck in the world of axiom of choice and living with the setups that are undecidable, but which must be decided somewhere along the way. Now, this is Badiou that we are trying to engage here. Accordingly, it becomes a true Platonist or generic wager to endure in the undecidable universe, where the thought, but also being, verifies itself precisely in the decisions it undertakes. It does so in order to break with an opinion or sheer experience that remains everywhere abound. So we would argue here that our aim is right the obverse of that of the constructivist thought. It goes at forging a maximal expansion of the principle of choice as far as the thinkable is concerned. Since decision in this case is primary and continuously required, it is pointless in trying to reduce it to the protocols of construction or externally regulated procedures. It is precisely the potentiality of the undecidable that can and must be decided. And such operation can open up immense possibilities, but what is even more important, it opens up the possibility of an infinity of consequences that can be derived from any such decision. This is what makes a true Platonist orientation, or in other words, a generic orientation, echoing on Paul Cohen's and his work on independency of continuum hypothesis from ZFC axioms. Now, for the last part of my presentation, I would like to argue that if a decision is to be made, it is always a decision sustained by a subject. As we try to show through the work of Velupillai, an algorithmic solution to the problem of the translation of a particular fixed point to a particular equilibrium state necessarily leads to a subjective decision. A suitable candidate needs to be picked in order to represent an adequate fixed point, hence the right general equilibrium. There is no difference here whether we speak of CGE, DSG, or agent-based models. The underlying mathematics stays invariant, retained in the limitations of the axioms of set theory. Now let me repeat here, there is absolutely nothing wrong with maintaining the set theory universe. However, then we are left with the problem of a subject who decides on the accurate point. It is precisely at this stage when we cross the line of scientific or objective character of mathematical economics and applied modeling done by social planners. Now, they avidly dig into the results of MATLAB or Octave outputs to call for an eureka, a true objective and universally valid result to be implemented into economic policy. But the moment the choice is taken as to where the equilibrium or some other partial equilibrium point is located and what policy is thereafter pursued, we then first of all lose the whole neutrality, but more crucially, we invoke an ethics of a subject. This implies that science is always the knowledge of a particular object with a particular imperative, which is in any case a parameter of ideology. This ethical constraint is finally distinguished as an operator of some determinate ideological stance. And every doing away with the subject of science is in the end an ideological operation of redressing such ethical conditions in an objective rationalization. So by ways of conclusion, it must be said that mathematical economics, I put this in quotes, has thus far not yet become invulnerable to these provisions. So I will stop here and leave you to ponder on these remarks and would thank you all for your undivided attention.
Thank you very much, Uroš. Meanwhile, I'm checking our YouTube channel, YouTube broadcast to see if there are questions. But as far as I see, there are no questions so far. And I would like to share a reminder with our audience that it takes some time to our talk to broadcast on YouTube. So there's a delay, like 2 or 3 minutes delay on YouTube. So if you happen to have any questions, please raise them before our session ends, so we can see them like some minutes before our session ends, so we can see them. This is a reminder for the audience. And now I can share my slides and start my talk. Let me see if I'm doing this. Oh, it should, I guess, you can see my slides, right? And you can hear me well? Yeah,
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Professor.
Okay, my presentation is about Gardner Means. He was an, I'm sorry. He was an American business person and an economist. He's considered one of the most influential economists of the 20th century for multiple reasons. First, he was a member of Franklin Roosevelt's Brain Trust with Adolf Berle, his professor, and he co-authored the book with his professor Adolf Berle, The Modern Corporation and Private Property in 1932, which remains one of the most cited works of the 20th century in social sciences and law. He authored or edited several works that provided the analytical background for the New Deal policies. Gardner Means is known for his heterodox views on certain economic issues, such as profit maximization of firms or price determination of firms. Certain post-Keynesian authors, like Alfred Eichner, Frederick Lee, and more recently Guian Gu, consider Gardner Means as one of the founding figures of post-Keynesian economic thought. Warren Samuels and Stephen Medema further suggest that he was the first post-Keynesian economist. Paradoxically, many surveys of post-Keynesian economics by prominent authors do not mention Gardner Means' name at all, or they cite him only in passing. In Frederick Lee and Paul Danworth's terms, institutionalists and post-Keynesians have either uncritically accepted Means claims or simply ignored them. For example, yesterday there was a talk by Louis-Philippe Rochon about, why my slides are moving themselves. Okay, let me do it like this. Okay, there was a talk by Rochon, and it was about post-Keynesianism and Basil Moore, and he didn't cite Gardner Means at all. There was a talk by Gerald Friedman. He did cite Gardner Means, but it was not a post-Keynesian context, but it was an institutionalism context. So my question in this talk is that why do majority of post-Keynesian economists or authors ignore the first and or the quintessential post-Keynesian economist, referring to Gardner Means, of course. There is yet another reason that makes Gardner Means interesting for a Turkish economist, as I am. He started his business career in Turkish, then Ottoman city of Harput in 1919, when he volunteered in an Armenian orphanage to run its workshops. It was in those workshops where he learned the artisanship of weaving, and he benefited from his weaving experience when he established his own blanket company after going back to the United States. He claims that his experience in Turkey had an important impact on his conceptualization of an industrial economy as opposed to a quote-unquote prefectory economy. So throughout his career, Means authored several books and dozens of published and unpublished materials. Three interrelated subjects dominate the majority of these writings, and these are: first, increasing concentration in American industries; second, separation of ownership and control in big businesses; and third, the administered prices. According to Means, a corporate revolution took place in the US in the early 20th century that started a new era, what he calls collective capitalism. Industrial concentration and separation of ownership and control constitute the two main elements of this revolution. Regarding concentration, Means calculates that in the late 1920s, among all 3,000 non-financial corporations, the largest 200 controlled approximately half of the wealth and more than 40% of income. These ratios rose even further in the following decades. Concentration remains high, both in intermediate goods sectors such as oil and iron and steel, and food production, retailers, utility companies, and railroads that serve millions of American end users. According to Means, high degree of industrial concentration constitutes an important reason why the classical assumption of atomistic firms holds no longer valid for the 20th century capitalism. His rejection of one of the basic assumptions of Marshallian economics attracts the sympathy of post-Keynesian economics, which stress the dominance of oligopolistic structures in modern capitalism. A second element of the corporate revolution was the spread of ownership of those giant corporations. In less than 30 years, the number of shareholders in the US quadrupled, reaching 18 million. In 1929, of the 200 largest firms, 71 had more than 20,000 stockholders. Among the biggest companies, the share of the largest stockholders remained less than 3% only. In other words, as firms became more concentrated, their ownership became more diffused. This quote-unquote collective capitalism differs from the Marxian conceptualization of capitalism, where workers are separated from instruments of production. There is no more class struggle because, quote, it can no longer be said that any payment to capitalists represents exploitation of labor, unquote. Due to the spread of ownership, individual shareholders' control over corporations have decreased. By control, Means refers to, quote, actual power to select the board of directors, unquote, of a company. Ownership and control was separated, and this has implications with regard to the profit maximization behavior of the firm. Means claims that the group of people who has the control of the firm do not necessarily aim to maximize the short-term profits, simply because only a small portion of those profits would accrue to them. Prices are administered to reach a target level of long-term profits, which are set below maximum level to keep the possible new entrants away and avoid public reaction. When short-term profit maximization is no longer the aim, prices do not respond to changes in costs in the short run. From the publication of Industrial Prices in 1935 to his death, Means published numerous materials to show that industrial firms fix their prices over extended periods, despite the change in both demand and costs. This is what Means calls price administration. In 1975, he wrote that, quote, even the Oriental bazaars have been turning to price administration. A Turkish shop selling at administered prices is likely to post a sign, prices a la franca, unquote. Gardner Means was among the first economists who extensively studied industrial price rigidities. The evidence that he provided against the notion of market clearing and flexible prices sparked strong debates among economists. His quarrel with George Stigler is well known. On the other hand, some post-Keynesian economists who have critical takes about the marginalist approach endorsed his views. Means suggests that not only prices, but also wages are administered. Firms and big trade unions fix wages through long-term contracts. Therefore, his attack on marginalism extends beyond the limits of price theory to cover labor issues. In his Veblen Commons Award speech, he stated that, "At the time I received my MA degree in 1927, orthodox macro theory contained nothing of substance which distinguished labor and oranges. I did not quarrel with this paradigm as it is applied to a pre-industrial economy such as my part of Turkey. In fact, I found it quite beautiful." Here I will not discuss his strangely orientalist tone about the Turkish economy. Instead, I make a case that means, ideas, and post-Keynesianism remain in harmony on the surface, but in conflict on a more fundamental level for several reasons. Let me briefly explain these reasons. Firstly, his opinion about appropriateness of using the same kind of analysis for oranges and labor for pre-industrial economies like Turkey falls behind the neoclassical analysis, let aside being post-Keynesian. So-called perverse supply behavior in agricultural labor and agricultural products has long been discussed and documented since Alfred Marshall. Quote, "Bad harvests, war prices, and convulsions of credit have at various times compelled some workers, men, women, and children to overwork themselves. And cases of ever-increasing exertion in return for a constantly sinking wage have not been very rare in past times." Unquote. This was a quote from Marshall. So therefore, as seen in this quote, even the orthodox theory is reluctant to apply simple supply and demand analysis freely to agricultural issues. So my second point is that in almost all of his writings, Means examines subjects that post-Keynesian economists considered in their agenda, such as industrial concentration and oligopoly, wage and price inflexibility, and long-term unemployment. However, almost never in his career he cited post-Keynesian or Marxian economists who also extensively wrote on these issues. For example, in his various writings, he devoted hundreds of pages for the discussion of socially optimal level of wages and profits, without citing Nicholas Calder or Luigi Pasinetti even once. Apparently, post-Keynesian economic growth theory didn't appeal to him at all. Similarly, despite the fact that Means wrote numerous articles about oligopolistic pricing, without using the term oligopoly, he was not interested in Kalecki's concept of markup pricing, one of the building blocks of post-Keynesian price theory. He was so busy with developing his own explanation about administered prices that he ignored all alternative theoretical explanations with regard to price rigidities. John Blair would be straightforward enough to pronounce that administered prices was only a phenomenon that needed further theoretical justification. There were actually additional theoretical explanations on oligopolistic price determination that Means preferred to ignore. Edward Chamberlain, his dissertation supervisor, as well as Paul Sweezy, who worked with Means in writing of the structure of American economy in 1939, constitute two well-known examples. Gardner Means cites Chamberlain only one or two instances, and he does not cite Sweezy at all. My last point is that Gardner Means was almost an anti-Keynesian. He rarely mentioned Keynes, and when he does that, he does so to object him. For example, in his 1976 paper, Means maintains that the Keynesian theory of unemployment does not depend on wage or price inflexibility. Instead, it totally relates to Keynes' liquidity preference theory, which is actually insufficient to explain involuntary unemployment. According to Means, furthermore, in this very same paper, he opposes one of the most prominent post-Keynesian economists, John Robinson's conceptualization of Keynes. So, as Carolyn Weir, economic historian and Means wife, states that there are similarities between Keynes and Means policy recommendations, but their theoretical analysis differed. So my conclusion is that Gardner Means was one of the first economists who wrote extensively and provided statistical evidence on industrial concentration and price rigidities. These were his contributions that certain post-Keynesian economists find valuable. However, with regard to significant theoretical issues, Means and most post-Keynesians, and even Keynes himself, stood very apart. Consequently, Gardner Means never described himself as a post-Keynesian economist, and I think we should respect his decision, and we should follow his decision to not to be considered as a post-Keynesian. And this was my presentation. Thank you for listening to me. And just a second, please. Okay, I can stop sharing my screen, and let's see if there are any questions from you or from the audience.
No question on YouTube, Professor?
Yes, I don't see any questions either.
Yes.
Okay. And Rosh, do you have any questions to Nitu or to me, or and of course?
Yes, perhaps. Yes, I would like to ask something. Your presentation. Thank you very much. I find it very interesting. I mean, I did my diploma thesis on John Kenneth Galbraith.
Oh, okay.
So I should know something about Berlin Means because he quotes them quite a lot. But
yes, I know.
For me, what was interesting in your talk was actually, I haven't really ever imagined that you can put like post-Keynesianism with Berlin Means together. I mean, because of their micro foundations that they started off, like studying the business enterprise and stuff like this, which is a totally micro approach. And then the Keynesian whatsoever, which doesn't have this sort of basis. I mean, I find it interesting that it should be like interconnected. Can you please just give me a little bit more something? How does this connection
between Means and post-Keynesianism?
Yes, between Keynes and then post-Keynesianism.
Gardner Means wrote a lot about price determination, so it's a micro issue,
yeah.
Right? So as well as concentration and oligopolistic structures. He didn't use the term oligopoly much, but he extensively wrote about oligopolistic structures, and probably that's why some post-Keynesian economists consider him the founding figure of post-Keynesianism, and I disagree with that.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so it is through prices that they get together with this. Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, and Nitu, do you have any questions to Urosh or to me?
No, I am clear with your thoughts, and it was really nice to listen to you, both of you, Rose and Kemal. It was really nice to listen to you both presentations.
Thank you, thank you. It was nice to listen to you. I learned about Gandhi's economic philosophy. Thank you very much. It was.
Yes, I always wonder whether Gandhi's philosophy could, in any sort of way, be introduced in
yes, in today's world, if it will introduce, then so many aspects will change. But I don't think the comments are thinking about it so seriously. I don't know.
But how serious is his philosophy in terms of economics in your country, in India? Does it have any significant impact, or is really just like, I don't know, just something?
The base of its philosophy was self-sufficient economy. So in today, if we in India, we are they are making India Swadeshi movements. In our government has established so many policies according to this, but the results are not. We are not seeing any result. But the government have announced so many policies like Make in India and Swadeshi and Atmanirbhar, Atmanirbhar, yani self-sufficient. But we are not seeing any result right now.
Okay, so let me check YouTube channel again to see if there are any questions. No, there are no questions. So do you have something to add? Do you have something to share, or else we can finish our session? You don't have, Urosh?